Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something powerful today. Something most people don't realize until it's already happening. When you stop reaching out, when you go quiet, when you don't text, don't call, don't chase, something very interesting happens in a man's mind. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take you deeper into this truth. Silence creates awareness because this is where real power begins. Most people underestimate the strength of silence because they confuse it with weakness. They think if you stop talking, stop reaching out, stop explaining yourself, you're losing ground. But the truth is, silence is not absence. With silence is presence without permission. It is the moment when your absence becomes louder than any words you could have spoken. When you always reach out, you remove the opportunity for the other person to feel your absence. You fill every gap, you answer every silence, you smooth over every distance. And in doing so, you remove the space needed for awareness to grow. People don't miss what is always available. They notice what suddenly isn't there. The moment you stop reaching out, something shifts inside the other person. It may not show on the surface, but internally, their mind starts working. The first thought is confusion. Why haven't they texted? Then comes curiosity. What are they doing? Then uncertainty creeps in. Did I do something wrong? And that's when awareness begins to wake up. You see, awareness isn't born from comfort. It's born from disruption. When the pattern changes, the mind pays attention. When your presence is no longer guaranteed, your value becomes visible. Silence interrupts routine, and interruption forces reflection. When you were always there, always available, always initiating, your presence became predictable, familiar, comfortable, and comfort, while it feels nice, often leads to unconscious neglect. Not intentional harm, just inattention. People don't realize what something means to them until they have to face the possibility of losing it. Your silence creates that moment of facing reality. Now, here's the part most people don't understand. Silence doesn't work because it's a tactic. It works because it shifts energy. It removes effort from one side and creates space for the other person to either step forward or fall back. That space is honest. It reveals truth. When you stop reaching out, you're not punishing anyone. You're giving them the room to feel the absence of your energy. And energy is powerful. People remember how you made them feel far longer than they remember what you said. When that feeling disappears, it leaves a noticeable void. Silence makes people reflect on their behavior. They start replaying interactions in their mind. They wonder if they took you for granted. They ask themselves why you stopped. And in that reflection, awareness grows, not because you demanded it, but because it naturally surfaced. This is where clarity begins. Because when someone is given space, they reveal their true intentions. If they care, they move closer. If they don't, they drift further away. Either outcome gives you the truth you need without confrontation, without pleading, without exhausting yourself emotionally. Silence is not about control. It's about dignity. It's about saying, I don't need to chase what's meant to choose me. It's about understanding that real interest shows up without being forced. When someone values you, they don't need constant reminders of your existence. And here's the powerful part. When you stop chasing, you reclaim your energy. You stop anxiously checking your phone. You stop overthinking every message. You stop trying to read between the lines. That mental space you reclaim begins to restore your confidence. You start feeling grounded again. As that confidence returns, your energy changes. You're calmer, more centered, less reactive. And that shift is noticeable. People can sense when you're no longer seeking validation. It changes how they perceive you. Silence also protects your self-respect. Instead of explaining yourself to someone who isn't listening, you choose to honor your own worth. You stop trying to convince someone to care. And that decision, that quiet boundary, speaks louder than any argument ever could. When you stop reaching out, you allow the truth to rise naturally. You stop forcing connection and allow authenticity to take its place. And that's when you find out who values you enough to step forward and who only enjoyed your presence when it required no effort from them. This is the power of silence. It strips away illusion. It reveals intention. It gives you clarity without conflict. And most importantly, it puts you back in alignment with your self-worth. Because the moment you stop chasing what isn't choosing you, you create space for what truly will. Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you about what really happens when you stop reaching out. Not from a place of anger, not to manipulate, but from a place of self-respect. Because the moment you pull your energy back, something powerful begins to unfold. The balance shifts, the emotional weight redistributes, and the truth, the real truth, starts to rise to the surface. When you're always the one checking in, always initiating conversations, always asking how someone is doing, you unknowingly take on the emotional responsibility of the connection. You become the emotional engine. You're the one keeping things alive, warm, and moving forward. And when that happens for too long, the other person doesn't have to show effort. They just receive it. That's when imbalance begins. But the moment you stop reaching out, the emotional scale tilts. The energy that was flowing in one direction suddenly stops. And when that flow stops, the other person feels it immediately. Not because you announced it, not because you made a scene, but because absence speaks louder than words ever could. When you step back, the other person is forced to face the emotional space you used to fill. They no longer have the comfort of your consistency. They can't rely on your messages, your reassurance, your attention. And that's when something important happens. Awareness kicks in. They start noticing what you brought into their life, the support, the connection, the warmth, the effort. Things they may have unconsciously taken for granted now stand out because they're missing. And when something valuable disappears, the mind starts asking questions. This is where true intentions reveal themselves. If someone truly values you, your absence will disturb their emotional balance. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, persistent way. They'll feel the shift. They'll wonder why things feel different. They'll think about you more than they expected to. And eventually, that awareness pushes them to act. They reach out. They check in. They try to reconnect. But if someone doesn't reach out, if they remain comfortable in your absence, that tells you something just as important. It shows you where you stood in their life. It shows you how much emotional investment was actually there. And while that truth can be painful, it's also freeing because it removes uncertainty. It replaces hope with clarity. When you stop reaching out, you stop doing emotional labor for someone who may not be meeting you how. You stop carrying the connection alone. And that shift protects your energy. It gives you back your power. Many people fear this step because they're afraid of what they'll discover. They're afraid that if they stop trying, the connection will fade completely. But here's the truth. If a connection only exists because you keep forcing it, then it was already fragile. Real connection doesn't disappear when effort becomes mutual. It strengthens. Pulling back isn't about playing games. It's about honoring your worth. It's about saying, I'm not going to chase what doesn't choose me. And when you make that choice, you begin to see people for who they really are, not who you hope they'll be. This shift also changes how you see yourself. When you stop overextending, you regain emotional balance. You're no longer waiting for replies, analyzing tone, or questioning your value. Your peace returns. You become more grounded, and that inner stability changes how you show up in every area of your life. What's powerful is that this shift doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't require explanations or ultimatums. It's quiet, it's calm, and yet it's incredibly effective because energy doesn't lie. People feel when access to you changes. And when they feel that change, one of two things happens. They rise to meet you or they fall away. Both outcomes are valuable. One brings connection, the other brings clarity. And clarity is a gift many people spend years searching for. When you stop reaching out, you're not closing your heart. You're protecting it. You're allowing space for mutual effort, mutual respect, and mutual interest to show itself. And that's where real emotional balance lives, in knowing that you don't have to chase what's meant to choose you freely. That's the power of stepping back. Not to manipulate, not to punish, but to restore balance. And in that balance, the truth always reveals itself. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take you even deeper into what happens when you stop reaching out, because this is where the emotional truth really lives. When you step back, you're not just creating distance, you're creating a mirror that reflects effort, intention, and emotional investment. And most people don't realize how powerful that mirror can be. When you're always the one initiating contact, you unknowingly remove the other person's opportunity to choose you. You make the relationship easy to maintain without effort. You carry the emotional weight so they don't have to. And over time, that dynamic becomes normal. They stop asking themselves how much you matter because you're always there, filling the space automatically. But when you stop reaching out, that automatic comfort disappears. Suddenly, there's a pause, a quiet. And in that quiet, something uncomfortable starts to rise, awareness. They begin to notice the silence not because you demanded attention, but because your presence used to be a constant in their life. At first, the mind tries to dismiss it. They're probably busy. They'll text later. But as time passes, that certainty fades. And what replaces it is curiosity, then concern, then reflection. They begin to replay past conversations. They think about the times you showed up, the times you listened, the times you cared when it was convenient for them and inconvenient for you. This is where the emotional shift happens. The moment they start replaying moments with you is the moment you regain psychological presence. Not because you're reaching out, but because you're absent. Absence forces awareness. Presence often goes unnoticed. When you stop reaching out, you also stop feeding emotional dependency. You stop being the one who reassures, explains, and smooths things over. And when that safety net disappears, the other person has to sit with their own feelings. They have to confront the question, do I want this connection or was I just comfortable having it? That question is powerful. It brings clarity not only for them, but for you as well. Because while they're reflecting, you're reclaiming your energy. You're no longer checking your phone, hoping for a response. You're no longer adjusting your emotions to fit someone else's availability. You begin to feel grounded again, more present, more self-respecting. The shift is subtle but profound. When you stop chasing, you stop giving away your power. You stop teaching people that they can access you without effort. And in doing so, you reset the emotional balance. What many people don't realize is that emotional attraction grows in space. It grows in the moments of absence where someone has the chance to feel your absence. Constant availability kills curiosity. Distance, when healthy, invites reflection. And this isn't about manipulation, it's about alignment. It's about allowing relationships to reveal their true nature without interference. When you stop reaching out, you stop masking reality. Why? Let people show you who they are when you're not doing the emotional heavy lifting. Some will step up. They'll reach out. They'll show interest, consistency, and effort. And that tells you everything you need to know about their intentions. Others won't. They'll stay silent. And while that can sting, it also gives you clarity you wouldn't have had otherwise. It tells you that the connection existed more in effort than in mutual desire. And that clarity is powerful because it frees you from guessing. It frees you from chasing. It frees you from investing energy where it's not being returned. When you stop reaching out, you also start reconnecting with yourself. You notice how much mental space you were giving away. You realize how often you were waiting, wondering, hoping, and you begin to redirect that energy inward toward your peace, your growth, your priorities. This is where real strength develops. Not in control or manipulation, but in self-respect. You start to understand that your value doesn't increase by being constantly available. It increases when you choose yourself without guilt. And the beautiful part is this. When you stop chasing, the right people don't run away. They step forward. They meet you where you are. They show consistency without being prompted. And that's the kind of connection that lasts. So when you choose silence, you're not choosing distance. You're choosing truth. You're choosing clarity over confusion. You're choosing to let action speak louder than words. And in that quiet space, you finally see who is truly meant to stay. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take you deeper into the final truth behind what happens when you stop reaching out. because this is where transformation truly begins. This is the moment where emotional maturity separates itself from emotional chasing. When you stop reaching out, you are not creating distance to punish someone, you are creating space to protect your peace. And that single shift changes everything. For a long time, many people confuse effort with value. They believe that the more they give, the more important they become. So they show up constantly. They check in, they reassure, they accommodate, they overextend, and slowly, without realizing it, they train the other person to receive without reciprocating. The connection becomes unbalanced, and the one giving the most starts to feel drained, unseen, and uncertain. When you finally stop reaching out, it disrupts that pattern. The silence creates a pause, and that pause forces awareness. It forces the other person to confront a version of reality they've been avoiding. What life feels like without your emotional presence constantly supporting it. That absence doesn't go unnoticed. It creates space for reflection, even if they don't admit it out loud. At first, there may be confusion. They may assume you're busy or distracted. But as time passes, that explanation loses strength. The mind begins to search for meaning. Questions arise. Why hasn't she reached out? Why does it feel different? Did I do something wrong? That internal questioning is the beginning of awareness, and awareness is the gateway to emotional truth. What's important to understand is that silence doesn't push people away, it reveals their level of investment. When you stop initiating, you stop carrying the emotional weight of the relationship alone. And when that weight is no longer being carried, the imbalance becomes visible. This is where many people gain clarity they've been unconsciously avoiding. If the other person values the connection, they will feel the shift and respond, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely feel the absence. They will reach out, engage, and show effort. That response confirms that the seed connection has mutual energy. But if they don't reach out, if they remain comfortable in the silence, then you've learned something just as valuable. You've learned that the connection depended largely on your effort. And while that realization can sting, it's also freeing because it releases you from the illusion that you were building something together when in reality you were building it alone. When you stop reaching out, you also stop chasing validation. You stop looking for reassurance in someone else's attention. And in that quiet space, you begin to hear your own needs again. You start noticing how much energy you were spending trying to maintain something that wasn't being equally nurtured. This is where self-respect begins to grow. You start choosing yourself not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You recognize that your time, energy, and emotional availability are valuable. You understand that love and connection should not feel like work that only one person is doing. Silence also restores your sense of power. Not power over someone else, but power over yourself. You regain control of your emotional responses. You stop reacting out of fear of loss. You stop overanalyzing every interaction. And in that calm, your confidence quietly rebuilds. The beauty of stepping back is that it removes confusion. It brings truth to the surface. If someone truly cares, they will feel your absence and respond with intention. If they don't, you gain clarity instead of false hope. Either way, you win. Because when you stop reaching out, you stop chasing validation and start standing in self-worth. You stop trying to be chosen and start choosing yourself. And that shift changes everything. How you think, how you love, and how you allow others to show up in your life. In the end, silence becomes your teacher. It shows you who values you, who misses you, and who you as simply comfortable with your presence. And that awareness gives you something far more powerful than attention. It gives you truth.